Welcome to the Daily Bolster. Each day we welcome transformational executives to share their real-world experiences and practical advice about scaling yourself, your team, and your business.
Welcome to the Daily Bolster. I'm Matt Blumberg, co-founder and CEO of Bolster, and I'm here today with Amir Nathoo. Amir is the founder and CEO of Outschool. Outschool is an ed tech platform that inspires kids to love learning, which, as the parent of 3 teenagers, I can say is sometimes a tall order, but a very important and worthy mission. Amir, welcome to the Daily Bolster.
Thanks. It's great to be talking to you, Matt.
So let's dive in. So you're a 3-time founder. I'd love to start at what at least LinkedIn says is the beginning of your career. So I don't know if you did anything before what you recorded on LinkedIn, but 5 years at IBM doing software development before you started your first company. So IBM, one of the largest companies in the world, one of the sort of most venerable and at different points in time, revered companies and feared companies in technology, but a very different place, in the 2000s than it was in the second half of the 1900s, the 20th century. So we'd love to hear just a couple minutes about sort of what that experience was like and kind of how you got from there to, I want to go start something, like how you get from the multi-100,000 person company to the raw startup.
Yeah, I'll have to share my journey there. And, in some sense, it was really the other way around. It was almost that I always wanted to start a software company from a young age. And at the time, IBM seemed like the best path to get there. And it was really because I wanted to get into software. And at the time in the UK, where I grew up, as you can probably tell from my accent, there wasn't many places you could do serious software development. And so when I was graduating, knowing kind of this ambition of getting into software and probably going and starting my own business in software, IBM had a software development lab that was very highly regarded, a large one in the south of England in a place called Winchester. And so, I definitely approached my time at IBM as saying, I want to get into software. This is a great place to start. And I want to learn as much as possible about software, how it's built, the business of software as possible. And the inspiration for that, just wanting to get into software, was I was very fortunate to be exposed to computers very early. First through games, my parents buy me a BBC Micro as a toy, and then teaching myself how to program and getting support as a kid for that journey. Software was the start, and then IBM was the starting point in my career. And it was foundational in many ways. I joined the software development group in level 3 support, which was kind of the engineers who are tasked with, once it's established that there's a bug going on and maybe a live production system that's down and it's a problem that can't be worked around, it needs a bug fix. Someone needs to code up that fix and kind of address the problem. So it was a combination of software engineering and customer support. And I really enjoyed it because I established that I was actually a hacker. And instead of having to actually develop things in the normal process, you'd be up at 2 a.m, you're hot patching a live banking system. And I don't know where any other company where you could end up with a 20-something-year-old responsible for delivering a live patch, not going through any of the normal QA procedures, but just trying to get a live production system.
Yeah, it's like the equivalent of being like a triage nurse in an ER or something.
Yeah. No, it was a lot of fun. Honestly, in retrospect, I didn't fully understand the stakes at play for the people on the other side. But I guess maybe that was a little bit of a help. It was more like a fun game. Let's get this patched as quickly as possible and move on.
That's interesting. So, and I love your point about, sort of went the other way around. You wanted to start something, but you wanted that experience first. So you were at IBM in the UK for 5 years. What was the signal that you were ready to start something, or was it just that you had the idea and then you made a big move geographically at the same time?
Yeah, totally. And I guess the trajectory there was kind of a process of getting sucked in, and then finding impetus to pull myself out. Because when you're at the start of your career and your first job, as I was then, obviously you have very little context. So there was a time I thought, oh, this is cool, this is going well, I'm doing well. maybe actually I stay at IBM for a period of time and explore different roles. I did explore different roles. I spent some time on the consulting side. I got them to put me through their sales school. I was the only kind of person coming from an engineering background, like going through the IBM sales school, which was very highly regarded and intensive course at the time. And so I was getting sucked in. But one turning point for me was when IBM acquired a company based in Silicon Valley and span up an engineering team in the UK to kind of partner with that startup company to kind of share knowledge. I started to realize a bit more about the structure of what was going on here. It's like, oh, the innovation is happening outside of IBM in these startup companies. IBM is buying them and putting them through this awesome, like, scalable QA system and global sales system. But actually, the kind of exciting part from working with that, which I thought was on the other side. And that reminded me of my original aspirations, and made visible to me some of the kind of both the advantages and limitations of being in a big company like IBM. And so it crystallized for me, and also the realization that 5 years have passed, and I had the belief, which has maybe softened a bit, that if you're going to do this, you better do this soon. Life is short. You have a lot of energy when you're young. I read enough books. I was thinking, crap, sure, I've learned a lot, but isn't this just a crutch now that I'm 5 years into IBM and I'm not yet done it? And a mentor also kind of like pointed this out to me. It's like, most people who do it young, and like,
right.
And obviously it's anyone who's been through the process of leaving a stable job and starting a company knows the psychological pressure that can come, and the realization that it was that was holding me back, not a lack of idea, not a lack of financial resources. I came from a very modest background. I had barely any savings, but I eventually concluded that none of this was a blocker to leaving and starting a company.
Yeah.
And so I left with an idea and a friend who left shortly afterwards to join with. And we funded ourselves by consulting on the side, consulting part-time, which worked quite well, was very interesting, was unsatisfying in terms of how quickly we could learn and develop the startup. And so we started looking for funding. And in the UK at that time, no one had made money investing in the internet. Whereas in Silicon Valley, lots of people had made money investing in the internet. Right. And so it was like pulling teeth trying to extract a few tens of thousands of dollars from angel investors in London. And we happened to come across Y Combinator in the early days and said, oh, we'll throw in an application. And like they invited us for interview, and 20 minutes later offered us a $20,000 check. And that was just an incredible experience. Now it's like, oh, well, that happens all the time in Silicon Valley. But like back then, from founding team coming from the UK, I was like, holy shit! Like, does money grow on trees in this place?
I think the answer to that is yes.
And now I know some of the reasons why and the whole business model behind it, obviously. But just so it was very eye-opening. And we came over for 3 months for the Y Combinator program, and I both fell in love with the ecosystem in Silicon Valley from a work perspective, and San Francisco and the Bay Area as a place. Came back to the UK and told my wife, we should move.
Yes. How did that go over?
Well, I wasn't very polished at change management. Let me put it that way. Back then, I'm still not particularly polished, but very unpolished. It's like more like, I have this idea. We should like upend our lives and move to the Bay Area. But it was funny. It took a while, both from a visa perspective and just like, a life perspective, and persuade my wife that this would be a good adventure. What did it was a 3-week vacation to the Bay Area, where we did a road trip around the one. It was beautiful. Obama got elected. This was in 2008. And it was just a fantastic vacation. And my wife Kirsty woke up one morning and said, you know what? I'm down for an adventure. Like, we're not ready to kind of like settle in life and just be who we are right now. Right. And so it was fundamentally that desire for adventure that even underlies any kind of professional aspiration. We framed it initially as a 1 to 2 year adventure, and now, we've been here, several companies later, and 14 years later, American citizens, 2 American kids. So it did turn into an adventure.
Yes, I always tell people, not quite as far away, but I grew up on the West Coast. I'm in New York. I always tell people I'm on year 35 of my 2-year plan to try it. All right. So what was WebMind all about? It looks like it was about a 3-year run. And then it looks sort of date-wise like it either had a successor company in Trigger, or you sort of went straight from one to the other. So we'd love to hear a little bit about your first couple companies, which are very, very different in nature than what you've landed on at Outschool.
100%. And technically, it was one company, but it was a hard pivot that could easily have been a separate company. In retrospect, probably should have been. So it's fair to frame them as two different companies. And even pre-WebMind, there was a kind of quagmire of ideas in the kind of early days of YC that turned into WebMind. But what WebMind was a way to save and access your entire browsing history and use it to personalize your search. Because back in those days, Google search was obviously a big thing, but things like Google Drive and local search hadn't really been developed. So searching across all your information, including behind logins and on your personal computer, was obscured. And so the concept was, a browser extension that would record your activity, including behind logins. And then when you did searches, took over the right-hand side of Google and display search results that Google couldn't possibly display from your own information, from your browsing history. And this was an intriguing concept to the same kind of people who maybe use Delicious, if you remember that service, or people who like organizing their information.
Yeah,
and really
that was Albert, right? That was Albert Wenger.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, and Joshua Schechter was the founder.
Right.
I don't know Joshua, but inspired by that kind of thinking. I worked on content management systems, enterprise content management systems at IBM, and so there was kind of continuity with that idea of kind of methods of content management, methods of retrieval and organization. And we stumbled upon this business model where, hang on, you're taking over the right-hand side of Google for these search results. Well, that's really valuable real estate. Affiliate links and ads is the obvious place to go. Though in retrospect, probably given the size of the audience that was interested in that kind of tools, we probably should have gone freemium as a route. But we explored that for a while, and we got to some decent size of revenue. The problem with the business, I think, was the twofold. One that I've already alluded to. I think there's a limited number of people who are truly kind of geeking out about that kind of information retrieval and really organizing their information. So limited market. And we also we saw the companies like Conduit, which at the time was a big browser toolbar company, and the motions you had to exercise in order to get this toolbar distributed and then monetized end up being super sketchy. I mean, I think it was all legal. It's just like it turned our stomach.
I mean, it's
like IE toolbars, and then like secretly replace the Google page with like your own search page to harvest ad revenue. I mean, sure, like that could work. I mean, I guess it's legal because companies did it, but it wasn't the way we wanted to, make money, create a business.
I know. And then how'd the business do?
So, relatively small scale of revenue. We raised a little bit of money. It was survivable, but we decided to pivot because we didn't see a path to scale, and all the paths to scale were not what we wanted to do with our time. So basically, we as founders lost faith that this is what we wanted to do, and the size of the opportunity. But what we had built in the process of building WebMind was infrastructure that allowed us to create these toolbars that worked on multiple browsers at the same time, without needing to code them multiple times. And at the time we were thinking about pivoting, mobile platforms were taking off. So the App Store, Android, the Google Play Store, and mobile development was the hot thing. That was the area everyone wanted to build in. And a realization occurred was that the same problems that we had addressed with toolbars were present with mobile applications. And we realized we had this framework which could be applied to mobile apps to say, code once using this framework and set of APIs and build service, and we will create native iOS and Android apps and potentially other platforms down the line. Faster speed to support more platforms. And so we pivoted and changed our name to Trigger.io, which was a framework and cloud build service for developing native mobile apps while coding in JavaScript. And that was a better startup and a better attempt where we got to greater scale. because it definitely met the moment in terms of user needs. And it was a very different business though, because we'd be operating like a consumer business with a ad and affiliate business model, and now we were doing small business and increasingly like enterprise sales while building dev tools. But our empathy for the problem, our connection with the problem was much closer because we'd experienced it ourselves. So we were kind of getting more towards kind of founder product market fit, and having successfully identified an urgent need, which was in a much kind of more visceral way than our first attempt.
And by the way, founder market fit is huge.
Totally.
It's so important. It is one of the things that we're very fortunate we have at Bolster, right? We have a whole team of scaled senior executives helping other companies drive teams of scaled senior executives. And it's way more meaningful for us than running Return Path. A lot of us did both companies, even though we loved Return Path. It was a great company. It was a great company, good business, but none of us ever used the product. The product didn't mean something to us personally. And that's a big, big difference.
100%. And, I think going into startups, it was more like the first mission was, I want to found a company because I want to be successful and creative and take a different path.
Right.
And with Trigger, it's more like, I still want those things, but kind of like, we need to solve a problem here. We don't want to be off on the sidelines. We want to be doing something valuable for people.
Yeah.
And we've identified something that seems to be valuable for people and have the proof points to do that. And we have some experience of why it's valuable because we've experienced it for ourselves. So it was a kind of a different mentality going into that hard pivot.
Yeah. All right. So you're 3 years as WebMind, hard pivot, 3 years at Trigger.io. And so how did the second 3 years go?
So it was a lot of fun. And we made a lot of progress. We raised more money. In retrospect, we should probably have done a hard reset and just done it as another company, because there really was, limit. We could have built it all from the ground up with learnings, but at the time it felt kind of scarier to do that and easier to persist with the corporate entity. But we raised more money. We went after this opportunity. We scaled sales initially by targeting other startups. Who were busy, kind of a lot of new startups building mobile development apps. We built a team larger than before, and we got PR and we scaled revenue further than we had before. Two things came to light in the journey that started to make us kind of concerned about scale and actually gradually kind of top out at a certain point. One was a market reality. Part of the thesis of Trigger was that there was going to be consolidation in how mobile app developers developed the front end of their apps. And that consolidation was going to happen via some kind of cross-platform development mechanism. And we wanted to be the one. And one thing we observed is that did not happen. Mobile web developers used a variety of different frameworks, including no framework at all. And actually, no framework at all was the central competition. And another observation was, while we identified a real customer need, an urgent problem, and concrete ROI, the front end of a mobile app was almost regarded as so important that it's not clear you kind of outsource elements of it and get help. It's almost like it's so important you want to kind of use the best, which is native, and invest. So you're always playing this uphill battle. And that's in contrast with the back end, where you saw all these backends as a services rise, and there to be much more consolidation on the back end. And one thing I learned through that process was that, yes, it's important to identify a real tangible customer need, but you also have to think about kind of the barriers to buy. And you don't necessarily want to go for the hottest part of the need first, because it could be so important to the customer that the barriers to get started will be so high. It's sometimes better to go after a real need, but that's kind of easier to outsource. Just a typical example, like an example I used to use at the time was like logging. There were these platforms of service that started doing ridiculous revenue from websites. You're doing logging. Is that really a need? It's like, well, you need to do it. It's considered a hygiene feature. Is it the most important thing? No, it's not the most important, but you kind of just need to do it. And no one really wants to be spending their energy there. So it's easy to go to a vendor and say, please provide me infrastructure to improve logging.
Right. And all of a sudden it's Auth0 and Okta.
Yeah. And then expand from there. And it's like, just because you found a critical customer need, doesn't actually mean it's the right strategy to go head on at that need. Yeah. And actually that influenced a lot of how I think about the strategy Outschool, because kids' education is obviously a very high stakes decision for parents, and that was a key part of it. We also made some execution mistakes, intentionally slowing down our growth because it felt out of control in terms of our ability to deliver on the demand, which I now realize is like a standard evidence of product market fit. And yeah, you don't want to go too far out of control. There are stories about startups that take that too far. But actually that's something to lean into. And we slowed growth more than we should have. And we never recovered momentum. And that made me conscious much more about the momentum management behind growth. And just because, I don't know, things are feeling uncomfortable, inside the company and in how you're able to deliver and in support, doesn't mean you slow down. It means you kind of fix as you go along, and you have to find the right kind of velocity to manage through. So that was a key kind of execution learning I took from that.
Yeah. And what was the ending?
So ultimately we plateaued based on these observations, and we decided that this wasn't going to become, we're hyper ambitious. This wasn't going to become like the breakout success. And so it makes sense to find some kind of exit. And also the realization, and it comes back to kind of founder fit. It's like we might have been a fit in terms of understanding the problem space and skills needed, but it wasn't actually our passion. So actually when looking for an outcome, it was actually like, we want to do right by our team. We want to do right by our investors. We actually want to craft an outcome here that we don't have to work on developer tools for the next 2 to 5 years. So it was quite intentional to go somewhere that would value what we'd built and the experiences that we gathered along the way, but be in a completely different domain. And so we end up doing a deal with Square to acquire predominantly the team.
Okay. So that answers my next question.
Yeah.
Looking at your profile here, my question was going to be, how on earth did you end up as the product lead for Square Payroll after being a founder and before being a founder? So presumably that's the quick answer. What was the experience like at Square?
It was a roller coaster ride, a hell of a lot of fun. At this point, I'd spent 6+ years feeling like, in retrospect, making a lot of progress and learning, but at the time feeling like I was banging my head on a brick wall, trying to initially find product market fit and get to scale. To get involved in a company that was busy scaling and expanding, and then realize, I could use all these learnings and skills that I developed as a founder to really hone my craft in product in particular, was fantastic. And this was a time at Square when they went, in my time there, from like 400 people to 1,200 people in 18 months.
Right.
And
so interesting.
Coming through the back of a big fundraise, expanding out of their core. And the reason they were interested in bringing founding teams on was because they're doing a lot of expansion and looking to scope out kind of new areas of business development. So that's how I ended up founding the Square Payroll product within Square. This was a new area of expansion that I'd come in and identified there was a lot of existing thinking, a lot of existing advantages they can use. So it was a wild ride to be at that stage, to see the chaos of the startup. And this was my first experience of a growth stage startup. So, it felt kind of completely chaotic. And I was like, what the hell is happening here? This is like a terribly managed business.
Right.
And now I'm kind of running a growth stage company. I have a lot more understanding and empathy for the leaders at Square during that time, but it was just mind-blowing experience. This is the level of kind of disorganization and chaos, but you can't argue with the results. I learned something from that in terms of what seemed to be the right ways of working and structure and organization, and actually, kind of skirting the edge of chaos. It's kind of almost what you need to do in order to grow fast.
What's the most important thing you learned?
Well, I learned about myself that if I'm going to be in a growth stage startup, I better blooming well be running the thing.
Yes, right.
I didn't last that long. I came in with the best of intentions, I don't want to be one of those kind of jerk founders who comes in and just leaves after a relatively short amount of time. I really want to learn from the people. And I did learn. But I also had my eyes open to how much I could do. And I didn't really appreciate the skills that I had developed. Because when you're a founder, it's hard to reflect. And I came in there and I realized I could do all these things, not being afraid to pick up the phone to a customer as a PM, not having to go through other teams, being more self-sufficient, and all of that. And honestly, I think my learnings from Square were a little bit in retrospect, and almost in contrast. I'm not sure I fully appreciated the experience at the time. But one of the key ones was around change and the uncomfortableness and rapidity of change, and I guess relearning kind of some of the experiences I had with Trigger, which is that uncomfortableness, chaos, even misalignment is a symptom of fast change. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong as a business. And if you're pushing hard enough and if you're moving fast enough, that's going to happen. And the work is just to, keep working towards alignment, towards organization, towards towards that sense of control until you change it all again before you get there. And that's the startup journey. And so seeing that was a key line for me.
So I have one other question. I'm not sure if the year you were there was one of these years. So the answer might be you don't know, but I've always been fascinated by the notion that Jack Dorsey was the CEO of two very high profile large companies at the same time for a few years. So I don't know if that happened when you were there or after you left, but do you have any insight into how that worked?
It's funny. I don't actually remember whether that was the overlap, but the thing that I do remember, and actually was, and now I remember, was a key lane for me. I feel like I didn't work for Jack directly, but I interacted with him and saw him, and he was always very high level. And so it's not actually surprising to me that he'd be able to do that. And his superpower was as a visionary and a salesperson. And me and my co-founder had been brought in, where we sat at the back of like weekly debriefs, and Jack would be doing this, like his inspiring spiel. And one part of us would be like cynical Brits, yeah. But we couldn't help but be taken along. And we just couldn't help it. He was just that kind of, he would paint that picture. Even though voice and so he said, that's unbelievable, that's crazy. Like, how are you even going to do that?
Yeah.
He was able to do it so well that another part of you was brought along. And that kind of made me think in terms of how I realized that, you might hear these cynical voices when you're, inside yourself or from others when you're painting this picture of what the future could be. But that shouldn't stop you doing it, because you are bringing people along. And you're going to encounter some cynicism, and you're going to encounter doubt when you're trying to shoot after big things. But that shouldn't hold you back. It's kind of a useful and necessary part of trying to do great things.
Yeah, for sure. Sure.
So he did that really well. But I have some questions then about how that was translated into execution. But I think the other thing that I saw from Jack was just he brought on brilliant people around him, and so successfully kind of filled in for the other parts where maybe he wasn't so focused.
Yeah. Well, and presumably he had really some strong operating executives or chief of staff or COO or head of HR or whatever that kind of kept the trains moving on time while he was being the visionary.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
All right. So let's move to your current chapter. So 2015. You start Outschool with a mission of inspiring kids to love learning, which I absolutely love. Talk about Outschool. How did you get there from Square payroll?
Well, multiple influences, and by that point, I'd also gained the confidence to say, there's certain criteria about picking what you might do next, but it doesn't necessarily have to be anything related to what you did before. There's some underlying criteria. And I didn't necessarily want to start another startup. I was aware of how hard it was. So I more framed it as taking a break and pursue projects. I was very intent on only starting a startup. It was kind of pulled out of me, like by customers, by my own enthusiasm, and being very conscious of not forcing it. Because I felt kind of I forced it, trying to like chase some kind of dream or success in the past. Whereas this was like, I have ideas, but this has to be something the world needs, and it's kind of pulled out of me. And I was also conscious of really, what we kind of talked about founder fit, starting with my own motivation. And at the time I did not have kids, but I knew I wanted to have kids soon. And I was also very conscious like, hey, like if you're going to do a startup and have kids, that's tough. But what if I could combine like my next thing with my life and like make it relevant.
Ruthless efficiency.
Yeah, it's just like, well, it's hard, so I better be damn efficient, and it better be useful for my, and integrated with my life. And that way, reflecting on education, and I don't know honestly why I hadn't reflected on education before. I guess obviously the thought of having kids got me thinking about it. But both my parents were teachers, and I realized I had some strong views about education that I developed, and I hadn't really thought that through until I really thought, what do I want for my kids? And I was like, I'm not sure I want what I had for my kids, or the elements of what I had that I do want for my kids. And I started realizing, the things that I've used, the skills that I developed and needed as an entrepreneur, like how much did I really get that from traditional schooling and college? And even though I had the most fantastic education that you could get in the UK, and I started to realize so much of what I used was because of my parents and things I had pursued out of school. And that's where the name come from, like out of school learning. And in particular, just like my interest and love of software and the fact my parents supported that interest, I started to realize, there's a discrepancy here. It seems like I'm sensing a discrepancy between what traditional education is designed to deliver and what I think has been important for me. And I'm reflecting on the future and what I learned about the changes in the world through technology. Like, I think this discrepancy is going to get worse. And I think there's going to be more parents of young kids like me now who are going to sense that discrepancy and want something different or additional. And that's what kind of led me towards, that's a set of motivations that led me towards education, led me towards thinking about out of school learning, going directly to consumers rather than selling into the traditional system. Also, another observation was technology had not really transformed education in a significant way. And there were not big exits, and there were not big success stories, really transformational innovations. Sure, there were some IPOs selling it into the existence, but it was not a well-regarded or hot area. But I had this sense that there was this discrepancy growing between parent satisfaction with traditional education, but behavior hadn't changed yet. And I sensed that if there was going to be a time when there was going to be a seismic change, because when pressure builds up like that, when dissatisfaction increases, but behavior is not changing, that's pressure building up. And there's going to be some catalysts. And if you can get the timing right, there's going to be a change here. Could you accelerate that change? Could you time it right? So I thought this could be, if the timing is right, if the model is right, this could be a massive opportunity. Key risks are market and timing. But I thought, I'm patient. I've had enough success at this point. I don't need a fast exit. So again, founder fit. It was like, I'm wanting to be patient here and plug away at it and try and work on things that were far out, again, out school, far out of traditional education, because everything that had been attempted closer into traditional education hadn't got that breakout success. So we're going to go really far out, and we're going to be very patient, and we're also not going to be arrogant. So when you say the mission of Inspire Kids to Love Learning, I can go more into what that means. We didn't start with that. We started with, hey, we're going to build a marketplace focused on consumers, and we're going to target homeschoolers because that's where there's a lot of innovation happening and people have an urgent need. And we're going to learn, and we're going to spend multiple years just doing that. And then we're going to form our own opinions mission, because a lot of people coming in from tech into education were like, we know how to solve this. We've learned everything from Google. All you need to do is just apply the technology learnings to this new field, and it'll work. And it didn't. And there's been plenty of flameouts in education, I think, for that reason. Whereas we came in more like, we're explicitly not going to have like a very big vision. We're going to have a broad marketplace. We're going to learn from this initial audience. And that's how we got started.
And is it working?
Yes, to an extent. I think that's the to an extent bit is subject of any point and stuff. It's always to an extent. Had you asked me when we started we'd be where we are today, I've been like, awesome, it's great. It's been a rough ride to get here. The kind of key surprises along the way were first discovering the small group live online format. When we started, we were offering a marketplace of classes. We experimented with in-person classes. We experimented with content. And we saw some of these homeschoolers like get together with teachers on Skype and get into small groups to learn. And we thought, well, that's kind of like a really, really small niche. But hey, why don't we throw live classes over video chat up in the marketplace and see what happens? And that part of our marketplace just took off.
Mm.
And we started to realize, oh, wow, this new format is actually, we thought there'd be a bunch of tech issues. It's actually not as bad as we thought. People are familiar enough with this format. Zoom was just starting to grow. And so the technology was just good enough. The adoption was just good enough. And we started to realize, oh, there's big advantages to this in that it combines the best of in-person interactivity with online availability and convenience. And that parents could pay less for learning experiences and teachers could earn more than other formats because the cost of the teacher's time was split amongst the group. And you didn't have to pay for an in-person location. And so the economics of it, but no one had scaled it because it was only just possible. And it was hard to scale because you've got a marketplace, you've got live classes. But we succeeded in scaling that once we fully focused on it from 2017 because we picked the right early adopter audience of secular homeschoolers who had an urgent need. There were enough of them to solve the initial chicken and egg problem that you have in a marketplace, and it had sufficient schedule availability to create enough liquidity in the marketplace to start scaling.
Right.
So that was a big surprise. The second big surprise was COVID. We didn't found this company or decide to do live online classes because we expected there to be a global pandemic. But when the global pandemic hit and schools shut down, there was this.
It must have blown the business up.
I mean, there was this. There was a moment in February 2020 where the CDC issued this notice saying, we think schools might have to shut if this gets bad. And they're going to have to move to internet-based teleschooling is the phrase they used. And I locked onto that phrase, like, what the hell do they mean? And I was like, oh, shit. They mean what we do. And at that point, I realized like we had more experience than any other company or organization in the US at how to run these classes. And we started doing things like offering free webinars for schools and teachers, but it was a drop in the ocean. And when school closures hit, so many parents kind of came to us. Our business grew 15x in 2020.
Oh,
in revenue, not just usage from a multi-dollar starting point. So it was a crazy ride. So just keeping the wheels on the wagon during that time was tough. So that's what I mean about, it's great, obviously, that we were able to help, and it was great for the business, but it was a tough time. And then, of course, as schools reopened, we had a reset in our business. Predictable, but hard to get through. And now we're back onto a more kind of steady growth trajectory.
More sustainable path.
So, very, very happy with how it's going, and many of our hypotheses have played out. But been a roller coaster to get here.
Yeah. Well, I wish you a lot of luck with Outschool. It's a tremendous mission. Let me shift gears and ask two more questions. So the first one is about your role as a board member. So you're an independent director of someone else's company, not Outschool. Scribed.
Yes.
So my question for you about that, because I talk to CEOs all the time about the value of sitting on someone else's board. So I would love for you to give just a super quick answer of what is the best thing you get out of being on someone else's board?
The change of perspective. It obviously, as a leader, you always try and see things through other people's eyes, but to actually be in a different seat, looking at a different company that you care about, but aren't as attached to as a founder, just provides like a greater level of understanding and empathy when dealing with your own board. And I've learned a tremendous amount through it. I would say it's not something to take on lightly, because there's a lot of responsibility, time commitment that comes with it, and I want to do just as good a job for that company as I do for Outschool. And so it's a big investment, but at the same time, on a personal level and for Outschool, I think I've gained a tremendous amount by being able to see another company up close, and yet with a certain amount of kind of personal and emotional distance. I guess I'd recommend it if and only if it's the right time for you personally and the right time for your company for you to be able to take that time. But I think it really is a win-win. I would never consider having more than one board seat while also operating my own company. But I really do see it as a win-win because of that learning and that change in perspective.
Right. So my last question for you, as you sort of think about the arc of your career, everything we've talked through today, Is there a through line you can point to? Sort of one thing that's held it all together? Because I love hearing the experiences and like A, which led to B, which led to C, which led to D. But is there sort of one driving learning or driving force or driving principle that goes from finishing university through scaling Outschool?
I think, I've had a very varied career and in some ways a very non-traditional journey. But I think the through line, which some might frame as risk-taking, but I might call more like naive, jumping in at the deep end. Like at every turn, I've kind of like taken a harder path or a path that in retrospect seemed completely foolish, but in aggregate works for me and has taught me a lot. So, I mean, maybe learning actually is the thing, because that's what you get as the end result of jumping at the deep end. Faster learning at the expense of your own comfort.
Well, look, I think most successful founders would agree that having a learning mentality and a growth mentality is a very healthy driving force. So, great note to end on. Amir, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I love what you're doing at Outschool, and I'm glad to have a seat somewhere in the arena to see what's going on with it. So, good luck getting the business through growth stage.
Thanks so much, Matt. It's been a pleasure talking and really glad to work with Bolster.